I think that's where the partnership really exists now. It's evolved from here's some money to get your business going, and I'll sit on the board to advise, to here's money, I'll sit on the board, and here's a whole team of people that will help you hire your next CFO, get you in front of these three big enterprises and put you on a couple of panels so you can speak to people and build the brand itself as well.
So Abhishek, delighted to have you. Because you are currently working in VC Sapphire Ventures, and previously you used to work in Dropbox in partnerships, and before that in Adobe in product, I think you're one of the best people to discuss ecosystem and partnerships. And let's start with how European startup ecosystem is evolving, what are the trends there, and then we zoom into how companies use partnerships to scale, and what are the roles that VCs play in this process. First of all, Europe is trying to catch up with US, and Silicon Valley is like a really difficult benchmark to beat. I would love to hear your thoughts, because you are working in Sapphire, which has great overview across both sides of the pond. So which trends do you see in the European startup ecosystem? How is it evolving?
Thank you for having me here. It's great to catch up again. Wish we could have done this in person. We're not able to, obviously, due to everything in the world, but I'm just happy that we can connect this way anyways. And I recently joined Sapphire Ventures. I'm heading up the business development side of their European portfolio growth. So what that means is that my job is to help the companies that Sapphire Ventures invests in become successful past their point of investment. Just do what I can to make sure that they are exposed to the right opportunities and given an extra boost that we can. The question is really good. The European ecosystem is very interesting. And I think that if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, I would have said that replicating Silicon Valley is a goal. It's definitely the idea that you want to do to compare yourself to Silicon Valley and San Francisco. If I'm honest now, as we consider the world in this new format and how things will be evolving and how talent will be spreading, I think now the idea is maybe not to replicate Silicon Valley, which was to press together as many people in a small area as possible and potentially wreck that particular market in other ways for the sake of technology, but to look more at the spread of technology and the spread of startup growth across different regions. Now, if we're talking just about the US, that means we're looking into New York, we're looking into Austin, we're looking into Denver, we're looking into Boston, we're looking into Charlotte, we're looking into Atlanta, and we're seeing that talent is going to start growing, and therefore startups and ideas are going to start to grow and manifest in those other locations. Europe is a very, very interesting experience because whilst it is a similar geographic spread across different countries, it's all very different on the cultural and language side. So whilst in the past, there have been fewer startups in Europe, raising less money in general, therefore leading to potentially less success, I think that number of unicorn growth that we've seen, which used to be 14%, is going to slowly grow. And I know that a big one in the UK was Checkout.com. That was a big one that came up recently. I know TransferWise is a very, very large London base. And there was an article that I read the other day about just how many people who worked at TransferWise are now moving on to their own startups, much like in a Dropbox sense that I was used to with a lot of my old colleagues. And just generally speaking, how foreign investors are starting to look at the B2B focus of Europe. So because our markets are so complicated, because it's difficult for an American company to really prove success in Europe right away, starting in Europe proves to be a little bit more exciting and a little bit more of a challenge, if you will, for a company. So anybody shows cross-European success at a startup level tends to be a little bit more of a fathomable product in the end, because they've already shown the UK market is successful, the Nordic market is successful, the French market, the German market, the Italian, the Spain, and the Spanish, which is very different than saying the Midwest, the West, the Northeast, and the South of the US, because those are not quite as different as they are in Europe. So I know that's a long answer to a very short question, but my general sense is that as we will continue on this sort of post-pandemic world, hopefully the post-pandemic part starts soon, we're going to start seeing the European startup ecosystem really catching up. But it won't be, catching up to Silicon Valley in that way. It's going to be a diminishing bit of Silicon Valley and a little bit a rise of other cities, a rise of the American ecosystem, but then a rise of the European ecosystem. So it's almost as if the playing field will sort of level eventually, because so much talent will spread everywhere. And folks like Spotify will allow people to move all over the world and still be paid the salaries that they want to be paid for working at a place like Spotify.
But at the same time, we also see funds like Sapphire, for example, and Sequoia becoming more active in Europe. Do you see this kind of emergence of kind of more global portfolios?
It's good to know that there's a lot of really big, successful Silicon Valley venture capital firms like Index and Balderton, that are based here. They're actually London-based, European-based, and the satellite office is the Silicon Valley office. Sequoia, Sapphire Ventures, we are all making more bets in Europe now. That's a testament to just the general sense of positivity and growth that's occurring in the continent. But B, and if I'm honest, it's a little bit of a catch up. It's knowing that there were opportunities that were mentioned earlier on with the percentage of unicorns in Europe that probably were going to be more successful if there had been more investment in the market. So a lot of these venture firms are seeing that there is a great opportunity. That, and I think the prevailing world sentiment is that our diversity of thought needs to be a bit better. And by that, I don't mean that any one firm or any one person has been really, really restrictive, but just that if a lot of these monetary groups are just based in California, it's a bit of a group think on the way that Californian technology and Californian companies will work. As you start spreading those people across to other places in the US, to other places in the world, and into Europe and in London and so on, you start to get a bit more of a diversity of mind and diversity of thought. And that helps to indicate better opportunities that might occur. And perhaps you might find that company that's based out of Ireland or Germany or France that you might not have looked at 5 years ago, but because somebody else who knows the ecosystem and knows the markets really well can say, well, they have actually partnered really heavily with this company that's based out of Europe that is an absolute powerhouse out here. And we really think we should follow up on them because that sumo relationship is going to be very important to them.
So VCs love to say that they partner with startups. And especially in COVID time, it becomes like even more important. In terms of trends that you see in your fund and also in other funds, how is this relationship are evolving?
It's funny because my perception of the venture capital world when I lived in San Francisco was that it was this very unattainable place, and that to get a seat in front of a VC as a revenue generating startup or even as a revenue neutral startup, it was this really, really massive deal. And it was, and no knock to anybody in that ecosystem. It was a very big deal for all of those people. Now I think we have a lot. We have a lot of companies and we have a lot of VCs. A VC who finds a good bet is going to compete really hard with other VCs. So the success of closing a deal is also a bit like a sales process. Rather than me trying to sell you my product and get money from you, I'm trying to sell you my money and take product from you, or in this case, like options and such and ownership. It's funny because that relationship is expanded more and there's much more competition. So in that light, VC firms, especially the early stage ones to start, and now the later stage ones, taken more and more of a tact of portfolio success. And portfolio success and growth is really important because these VC firms are A, investing a lot of money into these companies, and B, are also trying to differentiate themselves. And both of those lend themselves really well to a post-money conversation. So it's great. You'll have an MD on your board. That's wonderful. We're happy with all of that. But how can we help your sales team run their POCs more efficiently? How can we help you readjust your pricing so it's a consumption-based model? How do we help you get that introduction to that enterprise company that you've been working towards? How do we help you open up in Europe, which is a little bit of what Sapphire Ventures as well as other VC firms are looking to help their startups do, which is just get to a global expansion, as necessary. So the idea is that we're helping to grow. The anecdote that someone told me from a VC firm in the US was that money is all the same color. It is just black and white digits on some screen somewhere. Right. And what can you add to that particular color? And so roles like mine, roles that have a specific growth interest in mind, are ones to help people become more successful through executive reach outs, focus groups, introductions, hiring, best in class strategies, whatever it is. And I think that's where the partnership really exists now. It's evolved from here's some money to get your business going, and I'll sit on the board to advise, to here's money, I'll sit on the board, and here's a whole team of people that will help you hire your next CFO, get you in front of these 3 big enterprises and put you on a couple of panels so you can speak to people and build the brand itself as well.
It's very fascinating that VCs basically had to step up, which helps the startups. To just a quick follow-up, in terms of portfolio approach, if I may, did they try to kind of build the puzzle of different products within one sector, or like, do they map different sectors? How this portfolio kind of works in practical terms?
We work in this sense of where the firm has its strengths already. There's a few VC firms that really feel like they're completely spread across every type of technology. It would just be completely crazy to try to do that, but maybe like an Andreessen would, because they're such a massive firm. On our end, and in many other firms, like including people similarly in our space, a lot of what it is knowing what we're particularly good and focused at. So is it a B2B SaaS model and your focus is working with the enterprise, and then therefore the CIO is particularly the most strong person you can speak to. Now increasingly with COVID, it's also like a CHRO, which is head of people, looking into people to help them spread, help globalization occur with the roles that they have in their company. So we do sort of adjust course per each company, and I think it's important too, because it's not a one size fits all. When you're trying to sell a deep data learning platform, or you're trying to sell a marketing platform, and then you're trying to sell a DevOps platform, it's really incumbent upon the VC to make sure that the relationships with the company are not singular, but are multiple. And so when we have a really, really great conversation and we work with like Lloyd's Bank or something like that, just as throwing a name out there, is a big bank in the UK, it's not just talking to the person who runs their real estate section for our real estate investments, but it's also working with the people who work on their IT side. It's working with people who work on their HR side. It's working with people who work on their investing side, and having a good spread on digitization as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but ultimately like the silos of it really, really matter based on the software and what the fund's role generally is.
Looking into the future of 2021, which we all hope that it's going to be much better than 2020. So looking at European startup ecosystem, what are you most excited about?
Growth is probably the coolest bit that we're going to see. COVID has been awful. Let's just say that, for many reasons. But as a result of it, we have this idea that all of Europe can be a tech hub. It doesn't have to be London or Berlin or Paris or Stockholm. It could be Madeira. It could be Madrid. It could be Barcelona. It could be Rome. It could be the village outside of Estonia that there's a bunch of developers who live there. More cities are going to have more technology-enabled users. It's going to mean that our connectivity is going to get better. It's our technological fluencies are going to get better. As companies are going to let people spread more. Suddenly you're going to see talent in places you hadn't seen before. So the key here is, how do we coalesce around that, from payroll, governmental tax restrictions, so that companies and startups and enterprises can scale geographically. That's one thing Europe lacks that America does really good at. And that's that in America, it's very easy to leave a region to go to another region. You don't really have to go through much aside from, getting a new driver's license or something like that. But in Europe, it's going to be important to allow that sort of flexibility of movement. I know already the EU is pretty good at that. People can travel really easily across borders, but settling in different countries can be a little bit of a tricky situation. And so letting people settle much more easily across the continent, that's really going to lead to a great amount of growth. And that will open up the European startup ecosystem quite a bit. Brexit didn't do anybody any favors, but Ireland and England were already islands to begin with. The UK rather, and Ireland were already islands to begin with. That doesn't preclude people from using all of the regions that are at their disposal in Europe to try to be successful. You don't need to live in London anymore to work for a really, really great tech company. You can live in Edinburgh. You can live in, Manchester, wherever you want to go, or you can live in Dublin, wherever you want to be. And that's kind of the benefit now that we have in front of us.
I'm personally excited about two things. First of all, I'm really excited that Sapphire has a person like you on the European team. I'm sure it's like a big addition to the European startup ecosystem. And secondly, to what you just said, it's quite amazing that tech is basically connecting these boundaries, like startups across the Europe and across the globe. And I think borders that divide us actually are falling due to tech and because of, in a strange way, because of COVID, I think.
It's funny because the last thing I'll say is that I think the borders that we've created in the world were really, really helpful for when we all didn't trust each other. And I think technology is not fully solving that, but it is helping us get to a point where we can easily speak the same language in some way. We can share a lot of the same memes, the same videos, the same news stories. COVID is a great equalizer in that so many countries are stuck in the same place. And it might be that tech is a bit of an equalizer, and all of us can start to kind of see that these borders that we created, whilst are important for some aspects of life, don't need to be so restrictive as they used to be. I think that's maybe a little bit where the US has jumped ahead of Europe a bit, because originally the states were almost completely different commonwealths and countries, and that was the early stages. But now it's all very, very much like regionally, obviously, but it's more of a one kind of country. And I think if Europe can get in that focus, it's going to be really successful.